Thank you so much. Yeah, so we're going to be doing a series on dream work. And today we're going to just kind of go into an introduction of what that really means. On the agenda for today, first and foremost, I want to say that a lot of what I will be presenting and a lot of the work that I do when I work with dreams and with clients is kind of given by Robert Johnson's book mentioned here, InnerWork. So if you're really excited about this series and you want to kind of dive in a little deeper, you might get on Amazon and see if you can get a copy of that book. I think it's like less than $20. Today we're going to start to talk a little bit about our unconscious, the unconscious, inner work, what that actually is, dream work, archetypes and inner personalities, individuation, and shadow. So as a depth therapist, depth psychology is one of those modalities where we really work with a lot of the content that lives in the unconscious. So when we're thinking about our psyche, think about an iceberg. The top part of the iceberg, the smallest part of the iceberg, is usually about 10%, and we're calling that consciousness. And then a lot of other stuff gets kind of suppressed, the lower part of the iceberg, and that's what we're referring to or today when I'm talking about the unconscious. And when we're working with the unconscious content, it's really this universe of everything that is unseen and all the energies that live there. We'll talk a little more about shadow work and what that is, but a lot of shadow content lives in that unconscious realm. And dreams actually are a space where the portals between our consciousness and what's sitting in the unconscious become permeable. And that's why they don't really make a lot of sense. So if you're somebody that remembers a lot of your dreams, you might know that sometimes there's all kinds of images and things that literally have no logic to them. And it's because all these images are being given from the realm of the unconscious, and the language of the psyche is image. So the images become symbology, symbols of interpretation. And as we get deeper into dream work, that'll all make a little more sense. So let's talk about shadow. What is shadow? It's kind of been this term that's really been used a lot lately, I've noticed out there. Shadow lives in the unconscious. It's either the unrealized potential aspects of ourselves, or sometimes it's the different aspects of ourselves that we're not ready to face or we're not really ready to own and take responsibility for. So we all have relationships in our lives, and the thing about the shadow is we can see other people's shadow really easily. And then it's that thing that if we ever try to approach them, they not only can't see it, they will shut you down, they will walk away from it. And sometimes they can feel really frustrating if you're trying to address it in your relationship with someone. So as you can imagine, relationships are a really great platform or container to do shadow work, because the other, so to speak, gives us the ability to begin to see our own shadow. Inner work consists of shadow work. It's really taking that dive into our inner scape to really notice when something, for example, comes over me. Usually it's like a flood of emotion, or even sometimes qualities and different aspects of ourselves that can feel almost like a character. And we're going to get into that in a moment. But it's an invasion from the unconscious. And it's an opportunity when that happens in our lives to really access deeper levels of inner work. Because what happens is it allows us to take a look at those hidden parts of ourselves that have really strong feelings that want to be expressed. And when they're not seen and heard, they will wreak havoc in our lives, in our relationships. Inner work allows us to see the hidden, and allows us to see that we're just so much more than the I of whom we might be mostly aware of. Now, Dreamwork gives us another really powerful portal to get into that hidden content. And a lot of depth analysts and psychotherapists will use Dreamwork as a fundamental piece of their practice because it allows us to get into the language of the psyche in a very non-threatening way. And again, as I was mentioning earlier, it's the image and it's the symbolism that the images provide. So our dreams then become full of symbols. They become the portals, these images and these symbols, into our inner world. And it's really best done when you're doing it held with an analyst or even a friend if you don't have the resources or whatever to hire somebody to work with. Because if we're talking about the shadow, you can imagine that when we're working with our own dreams, sometimes they're limited in scope as to what we're able to interpret and access. Dream interpretation offers us a space to integrate ourselves, to digest that which gets repressed, all of that content that gets shoved into our unconscious, and it allows us to deepen meaning. It's, as a yoga therapist, I also want to just note that it's so important to give that unconscious content like a portal out for expression, because otherwise we just keep shoving it down into that bottom layer of the iceberg, but it's actually getting shoved into our bodies, our physical bodies. And so if we're not tending to these aspects of ourselves that can't be necessarily seen, they will eventually reveal themselves in the physical body in the form of illness. So Dreamwork can be really, really powerful on many, many, many levels. They help illuminate the different personalities that interact within us and that make up our total self. So if you think of somebody that has like multiple personality disorder, I think we've all probably heard of that conceptually. I want to just speak to how most of us have multiple inner personalities, different characters, so to speak, that make up who we are. And they have conflicts. You know, we've all heard that saying of like, well, part of me felt this way and another part of me felt that way. And there's this like inner conflict that arises. So our dreams are a way. There's also other ways, like I'll do active imagination with clients, where we're able to allow these inner conflicts a space to get transmuted and healed and digested. So in Jungian psychology, one of the things that Carl Jung brought to the table back then is archetypal patterns that live within the unconscious and the collective unconscious. So when I say the collective unconscious, I mean like everybody, not your personal experience of what's getting repressed, but what's happening on a bigger level in the collective. So there's certain things that live in the collective and that live in the unconscious that are referred to as archetypes. And this shows you 12 different archetypes that were identified by Carl Jung. They show up in stories. And then those stories show up in our lives. So in depth psychology, we work a lot with myth, we work a lot with stories, we work a lot with archetypes, because these patterns, these behavioral patterns that make these different inner personalities within ourselves give us access to really finding more balance, to making more meaning in our lives, and to finding more sound stability in our minds. So when we're able to identify what's at play, right? So if we have a mother archetype at play and it starts to become personal, we actually start to call that a complex in Jungian psychology, but we've all had that experience where a part of us will just take over. So I'm going to talk about the critic. The critic is an archetype. We all have this one. And we all know when the critic shows up. It really is judgmental. It has a lot of negative self-talk in many cases. And when that archetype is at play, it can make us feel really disempowered. It can make us feel really small. The critic is one that's going to show up symbolically in our dreams all the time. If we're dealing with a lot of like living up here in the head. So by understanding when the critic is there, when the critic has taken over your space, then with that awareness, it's so powerful, right? Because in that moment, you can then choose to maybe invite in a different type of archetype, not just into a moment, but into your life. So tying it back to dreams, this is why the archetypes are so powerful and important, because these archetypal patterns show up in our dreams, they show up in our lives, and our dreams give us the ability to really work with these archetypes so that we can feel more integrated in our lives when we're out in the world. So we're not one-dimensional, right? We are a combination of things. So what is individuation? Again, another depth psychological term. This is a term that Carl Jung used to refer to as the lifelong process of being a complete human being that we're born to be. It's a waking up of our total selves. So the ego mind, it's not aware that the I is much more complex, much more extensive than just the ego itself. And so that part of the psyche that gets hidden into the unconscious is so much greater, as we can refer back to that image of the iceberg. Remember, the bottom of that iceberg is so much bigger than the top. And so individuation is this lifetime process. It doesn't just happen in a moment, of really finding that integrated whole self, of bringing the masculine energies that live in each one of us and the feminine energies that live in each one of us, and integrating them so that we find a place of balance. It's finding, in a way, peace within our inner world and allowing ourselves to really deepen our understanding of ourselves in the process. So individuation, it's a lifetime process, and our dreams can really inform and bring some potency in our ability to go through that process of individuation. So when I work with people, a lot of the different webinars I'll do with Access Elite, I do stuff related to yoga. We'll talk about depth psychological things like dreams, for example. And the reason why I bring these two together is because the yogic aspect allows us to expand our awareness. It allows us to find a sense of safety and ground within ourselves, so that we're not constantly looking outside of ourselves when things get stressful and difficult. And then it also sets us up to do more deeper transformational work. And Dreamwork is one of those deeper transformational works. So I'm very excited to go through this series with you. This was just like an introduction, so I definitely want to open up to questions and so forth. And we're going to be having 4 more sessions together so that we can really dive into maybe some more unique experiences you're personally having with symbols, and then how you can really become a master at including dream interpretation maybe into your own life. Thank you so much for your time today.
Lisa, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, please feel free, go ahead and throw them up in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. I'd love to start us off. I'm curious if you can expand a little bit more on how you tie yoga in, or if there's any sort of personal experiences that you've had where you've had some sort of enlightenment. If you could just go into that a little bit more.
In reference to not Dreamwork, but just in general with yoga? Or
so if there was any instance where almost not while actually thinking about it, but maybe there was a time where you were in your yoga practice and where you found like, okay, what was the moment where you found, okay, these two really work together, or you had some sort of epiphany about something that related back to dream work, just kind of how those two intermold.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, a lot of the research that I did for my thesis when I was doing my master's program was around how we go through big life transitions and how they can be really destabilizing, and how, so for example, when life becomes destabilizing, a lot of people that remember their dreams will get really active. There's patterns that happen in the dreams, although the images and might change symbolically if we start to look at those deeper levels. What happens is we're able to see these patterns, and it's not kind of can turn into the archetypal stuff, and we're able to recognize what needs a little resolve, what's getting suppressed. So yoga, it does a couple things. One, it gives people the ability to go inward and to feel resourced. So depending on my clients, sometimes I'm working with people that are struggling with things like anxiety, depression, trauma. So when we start to move into more imaginal type work, which consists of the dream work, there's a reason why the iceberg is solid in that there's not information passing through both. So one of the things I like to do is I like to empower people through yoga practices so that they can cultivate a safe container in their body. And I learned through the research that that's where yoga can be really useful in mental health, is that it can help people feel empowered to have a sense of agency over their, different moods that might come through. And then what happens is we're able to do deeper work, right? Because if that content is in the unconscious and it's been stored and repressed and pushed away, it's being done for a reason. It's either something that we're not ready to look at, or it's our unrealized potential, which I think is really always interesting too, right? It's like we have this unrealized potential, but we get held back because we're, removed from it. And the thing about a lot of the work I do, which is why I have that logo, is that it's really hard as a therapist or as a yogi to separate the mind, the body, and the spirit. They all kind of integrate and work together. So people might be doing physical yoga practices, and then images might show up, or feelings might show up, or things might get released that have been kind of like suppressed in the body. And how they'll get released a lot of times is through like emotion. So with a lot of people that are new to yoga, what I'll find, because they're not opening up their bodies in this way sometimes, that they'll have big emotional releases. And a lot of it is what we hold actually in our chest, like the back of the heart area, and in our spine and in our hips. So it's all, I do a podcast called Staying Awake in the Waking Dream. So, yes, we're analyzing dreams here in the context of like our sleeping dreams, but we could also look at that like life is like a waking dream. And it's when we're conscious and we're aware and we're awake of what's happening around us, rather than going into that automatic mode, which I always use driving as an example, because, we've all been there where we're driving and all of a sudden we get somewhere and we just don't even remember the drive, right? And our lives can be like that. So yoga and psychology give us different ways to do that deeper work and integration so that we minimize our suffering as human beings. I don't know if that answered. I hope it did.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And while you were speaking, we actually had another question come up in the chat, and it was, why do some remember their dreams and others don't?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things that I'll do with clients, like if we're wanting to incorporate the dream work, is I do a lot of work with like ritualizing things, and dreams are one of those things too. So if somebody's having a hard time remembering dreams, we'll do some type of rituals and call in, like asking the dream to allow itself to be remembered, and sometimes people can't remember their dreams. So what I'll do with those individuals, I'll do a lot of like guiding them into, it's not sleep states, but they're different brain states. It's kind of like maybe a state that you might go into with hypnosis, but it's a liminal space. And in that space, it's similar to like when you're having a dream. And I guess, each one of us are so unique and so different. And sometimes I look at like, what are their habits? Is there something clouding them from remembering their dreams? So I feel like it's so personal to each individual.
So in that second situation that you were describing, are you still having the individual try and remember the dream, or put them in a state where they might have a new dream or see if it's a reoccurring dream?
So what I'll do is I'll support them in getting into a lower brainwave state. And then I will take them to a guided self-inquiry. So I might bring their attention to like their heart space. And then I might say something like, and then a door opens, and let's say we're working with a particular emotion or something that's presenting, and I'll say, and a door opens, and what do you see? So we're in that space where we can work with the content that's in the unconscious, but it might not feel like a dream would feel when you're fully asleep. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So last question I'll throw out if we don't get any more in the chat. We have another session with you next week. Is there any literature that you would suggest that we take a look at between now and then?
Yeah, that book. It's so cheap. I mean, it's so affordable. I don't want to call it cheap because it's, where is it? Here it is. Whoop. It's a little tore up because I've used it a lot, but it's called, let me just read it to you. It's called InnerWork. That's the name of the book. The author's name is Robert Johnson, and he's amazing. If you go on Amazon and you pull that up, there's 2 parts to this book, by the way. The first half is Dreamwork. The second half has to do with active imagination, and I'm sure maybe in the future we might even have some talks on that. So then you'll be prepared. But it's really about doing, different ways that we can do inner work and integrate. It's all about integrating all of that stuff that gets suppressed and pushed down and put away. That's the book I would recommend, because that's the book I'm going to be following, the kind of steps that Robert Johnson introduces. It's the steps I use. I find them very useful. And, if there is like a pattern, I would invite people to, do a couple things, especially if you're going to do the series and you are having a hard time remembering your dreams. I would actually just do a little meditation, nothing extravagant, right before you go to bed, just asking the unconscious to allow you to remember your dreams. Now, here's the thing about dreams. They come in and they disappear as fast as they come in. So you have about less than 10 seconds from the time you open up your eyes to get the most detail-oriented aspect of your dream. So what I'll have clients do, because sometimes they wake up in the middle of the night even, right? So it's like, it's dark, they don't want to grab a pen and try to write anything, and we're talking about 10 seconds, right? So we don't have like time for them to think too much. I'll tell them to just grab the phone and either do a voice to text and figure out what didn't make sense the next morning, or just record their voice speaking to what they saw in their dream. And then the way you want to write it out is in I, as if it's happening right now. So it's like, I was walking down the hallway and then a pig came flying from the sky over this river all of a sudden that appeared out of nowhere. And then I noticed as I was walking, it's getting as I am walking, it's getting very hot and the sun is rising. So you want to write the dream as if it's happening, because what that'll help you do is it'll help you remember more of the details of your dream. And as we get into the work, you'll see that even the little details actually have meaning. Nothing is in your dream on accident.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, thank you so much. I know I'm going to be so excited to hop on for our next session.